Elvis was deep into Love Me Tender, his voice raw with emotion, when Dean Martin walked uninvited onto the International Hotel stage, grabbed the backup microphone, and started harmonizing like he owned the room. Wait, because what Elvis did in the next 60 seconds wasn't what anyone expected from the young king of rock and roll. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the territorial defensiveness that Vegas insiders predicted. It was something that would make Dean call him the most gracious performer I've ever shared a stage with for the rest of his life. The International Hotel showroom was electric that August night in 1969. Every seat was filled with the kind of crowd that only Las Vegas could assemble when Elvis Presley was performing his groundbreaking residency. Movie executives and music industry power brokers occupied the premium tables near the stage. Hollywood royalty sat with their entourages in the VIP section. The anticipation hung in the air like expensive perfume, and the champagne had been flowing freely since the doors opened at 9 p.m. Write in the comments where you're watching this story from, and what time it is right now, because this story is about to show you what happens when two legends collide on the same stage, and only one of them knows how to handle unexpected visitors with pure class. Elvis was in the middle of his second set, completely commanding every soul in the room, riding the kind of wave that only happens when everything aligns perfectly. The kind of performance where every movement is poetry. Every note hits exactly where it needs to, and the audience forgets they're watching a show because it feels like they're witnessing something sacred. He'd already electrified the crowd with That's All Right, Heartbreak Hotel, and Don't Be Cruel. Now he was deep into the ballad that showcased the tender vulnerability hiding beneath the rock and roll swagger. The song that reminded everyone why he was called the king. Nobody saw Dean come in. That was the first unusual thing about the evening. Dean Martin, the king of cool himself, had somehow slipped into the International Hotel without causing the riot that his presence usually created. No Rat Pack entourage, no photographers, no casino executives scrambling to comp his every desire. Just Dean, wearing an impeccable black tuxedo, moving through the crowd like smoke, choosing invisibility over the agitation that followed him everywhere. He had been drinking. That much became clear later when people tried to piece together the events of that legendary evening and understand what had possessed the famously controlled Dean Martin to do what he did. Not stumbling drunk, but enough to loosen the careful restraints that usually governed his public behavior. He had been in Vegas for a week, taking a break between recording sessions, enjoying the anonymity that came with being just another face in a crowd focused on the young man commanding the stage. And somewhere during that week of room service and late-night poker games, he had decided that what he really needed was to see Elvis perform live. Not from his usual VIP table where casino management would fawn over him, but from somewhere in the crowd, anonymous in the darkness, where he could just be a fan enjoying the show like everyone else. The problem was that watching wasn't enough. Listening from the audience, appreciating the raw talent that was reshaping American music, should have been sufficient for any seasoned performer. But Dean Martin had never been just any performer, and he had certainly never been good at staying quiet when he heard music that moved him. The stage called to him like gravity, irresistible and undeniable. What happened next would become one of the most talked-about moments in Las Vegas entertainment history, retold in dressing rooms and casino lounges for decades to come. Not because of the clash of egos that everyone expected to witness. Not because of a territorial dispute or professional jealousy. But because of the extraordinary maturity that nobody in that room could have predicted from the 34-year-old Elvis. The kind of grace under pressure that separates true artists from mere entertainers. Elvis was hitting the emotional peak of Love Me Tender, the song that had introduced him to mainstream America back when he was just a kid from Memphis with a dream and a guitar. The band was locked in perfect sync behind him, Every musician understood their role in creating the magic that made hearts stop and souls ache. The lighting was perfect, a soft golden glow that made Elvis look almost otherworldly. And Elvis himself was doing what he did better than anyone else alive, making 1,500 people feel like he was singing directly to each of them. Then Dean appeared at the edge of the light. He walked up the side steps like he had every right to be there. Like this was a planned collaboration. Like sharing the stage with Elvis Presley was the most natural thing in the world. His steps were confident despite the bourbon, and his face carried an expression of pure musical appreciation that had nothing to do with ego and everything to do with one artist recognizing another. The band stumbled for a moment, instruments faltering as confusion rippled through them. Every musician looked to Elvis for guidance on how to handle this unprecedented situation. The audience gasped. A collective intake of breath moved through the room as 1,500 people realized something extraordinary was unfolding. And Elvis kept singing. His voice never wavered. His eyes tracked Dean's approach with an expression nobody could quite decipher, but everyone would remember forever. Dean reached the spare microphone at stage left, lifted it from its stand, and joined in on the final verse. The magnitude of this moment cannot be overstated. Dean Martin, uninvited and clearly under the influence, had just walked onto Elvis Presley's stage during the most intimate moment of his set and started harmonizing as if they'd rehearsed for months. It was the kind of move that could end careers. Every single person in that room held their breath, waiting to see how the king of rock and roll would react. Elvis had options. He could have stopped mid-verse and called security. He could have made a cutting remark. He could have walked off the stage and left Dean alone in the spotlight. Elvis did none of those things. Instead, he smiled. Not his practiced stage smile, not the famous lip curl, but a genuine, warm smile like an old friend had just surprised him in the best possible way. He shifted slightly, making room for Dean at center stage, and adjusted his microphone so their voices could blend together. It was the gesture of a host welcoming an honored guest, not a king defending his throne. And then something magical happened. They sang together. Elvis and Dean, the king of rock and roll and the king of cool. Two voices blending into something that had never existed before. The band recovered, locked in, and followed them with flawless precision. The audience began to cheer with an intensity that bordered on reverence. Two icons stood shoulder to shoulder on a Las Vegas stage, sharing a love song. No competition, no ego, just two artists creating something beautiful. The song ended, and the applause was volcanic. Dean stood there as the bourbon haze cleared and reality set in. He had just crashed Elvis Presley's show, and now he would face the consequences. But Elvis wasn't finished. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice cutting through the applause, "I'd like you to meet someone special. Some of you might know him. He's been known to croon a tune or two himself." The audience laughed, the tension dissolved. Elvis turned to Dean and said, "What do you say, Mr. Martin? You came all the way up here. Might as well stay for another song." The invitation was extraordinary. Elvis Presley, on his own stage during his historic Vegas residency, was inviting Dean Martin to stay. Not as damage control, not as a favor, but as a sincere invitation to share the spotlight. Dean nodded, not trusting his voice. What followed became legend. For the next hour, Elvis and Dean traded songs, shared harmonies, and teased each other with warmth instead of rivalry. The audience sat in rapt silence, afraid to miss a single moment. At one point, Dean whispered something to Elvis. Elvis laughed genuinely and waved it off. "You know what your problem is," Elvis said into the microphone. "You've got too much talent and not enough caution. Lucky for both of us, I've got enough stage to share." The crowd erupted. Before the night ended, Elvis did one more remarkable thing. He handed Dean the stage. "I've been up here long enough," Elvis said. "These folks deserve more than they bargained for, so I'm gonna let my friend here do what he does best." Dean took the stage alone and delivered the most vulnerable performance of his career. No swagger, no shield, just honesty. Afterward backstage, Dean found Elvis. "What I did tonight was wrong," Dean said quietly. "You had every right to throw me out." Elvis placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're all just trying to touch people's hearts," he said. "Tonight you didn't ruin my show, you made it better." Dean would later say, "They told me you were different. I believe them now." That friendship lasted a lifetime. Years later, after Dean Martin passed away, his family found a photograph. Elvis and Dean backstage, arms around each other, grinning. On the back were 6 words: "The classiest kid I ever met." This is the story of Elvis Presley and the night Dean Martin crashed his show. 2 kings, 1 stage, 1 decision to choose grace over ego. And a reminder that true class is revealed when the spotlight is brightest and the pressure is greatest. The story didn't end when the curtain fell, or when the audience spilled back onto the Las Vegas Strip buzzing with disbelief. In many ways, that night only grew larger with time. Word traveled fast in Vegas. By sunrise, casino lounges, hotel kitchens, and executive offices were all telling the same story, each version growing more reverent. Not about Dean Martin's audacity, but about Elvis Presley's restraint. About how a man at the absolute peak of his power chose generosity instead of dominance. Seasoned performers understood exactly how rare that was. In Las Vegas, stages were territory, carefully guarded, carefully negotiated. An uninvited interruption wasn't charming, it was dangerous. Careers had been damaged for far less. Yet Elvis had instinctively understood something deeper than protocol. He recognized that music wasn't a battlefield. It was a shared language. Dean understood it too, fully, once the alcohol wore off. In the weeks that followed, he told the story often, but never with humor, always with humility. He admitted he had crossed a line. He admitted he expected to be humiliated. And he admitted something else that surprised people who thought they knew him. "I wasn't testing him," Dean said once. "I was listening, and I forgot where I was." That mattered. Because Dean Martin was not careless by nature. He was calculated, controlled, famously distant. The public persona of drunken charm was just that, a persona. The real Dean was disciplined, guarded, and deeply respectful of the craft. Which made Elvis' response even more powerful. Elvis didn't see an intruder. He saw a fellow musician who couldn't help himself. And Elvis, who had spent his entire life being controlled by managers, contracts, expectations, and fear, recognized freedom when he saw it. That night became a quiet turning point for Elvis as well. Those close to him noticed a shift. He became more relaxed on stage, more playful, more willing to let moments breathe instead of forcing perfection. The residency continued to break records, but something intangible had changed. The shows felt less like performances and more like conversations. Elvis had learned that night that authority didn't come from control. It came from confidence. The 2 men stayed in touch, not constantly, not publicly, but when their paths crossed there was warmth, mutual respect, a shared understanding that they had witnessed something rare together. No contracts, no press releases, no exploitation of the moment. Just a memory. Years later, when asked in an interview about the greatest performers he'd ever known, Dean didn't hesitate. "Elvis," he said, "not because of his voice, because of his heart." And Elvis, when Dean's name came up, would smile in that familiar, gentle way. "He never had to prove anything," Elvis said. "Neither of us did." That's why the story still matters. Not because it involved 2 legends, not because it happened in Las Vegas, but because it revealed something timeless about greatness. Anyone can demand respect when they're in charge. Only the truly great can offer it when they're tested. That night, under the lights of the International Hotel, Elvis Presley showed the world that real power doesn't push people away. It makes room.